From the Alvin and Rosalie Sarachek studio, PBS Kansas presents Kansas Week.
Hackers only had to be smarter than a fifth grader to steal more than $400 million from the Department of Labor. That announcement sparking new fights between the Secretary of Labor and Kansas lawmakers. Plus, the concept versus the terms. What do diversity, equity, and inclusion mean to you? And should they be part of programs at your child's school? But first, a spike in violence and weapons found on high school campuses leads to the proposal of drastic new security measures in one district. That's what we're talking about right now on Kansas Week. This is Kansas Week, and I'm your host, Pilar Pedraza. What do you think about putting in screening devices to detect weapons at school entrances? It's an idea the Wichita School District is planning to ask the Board of Education to consider. The security change proposals came as the Wichita School District found 5 handguns on campus within the first 4 weeks of this school year. Terry Moses, the Director of Safety Services at Wichita Public Schools, says she will ask the Board of Education to approve the new automated screening devices at its next meeting Monday. The plan calls for 45 to 50 screeners at a cost of about $1.5 million.
The vendor that we are working with indicates that we may have an 8 to 10 week supply delay in terms of getting those to Wichita. We are putting on the agenda item up to $1.5 million to cover the cost. As you know, most of our schools have multiple points of entry at the beginning of the day, and we have a couple of schools that have over 2,000 students.
Moses says the new screeners are designed to detect anything from subcompact firearms to full-sized rifles, knives, and explosive devices. And joining us this week to discuss these issues, we have joining us by Zoom, Senator Rick Wilborn from McPherson, the Vice President of the Kansas Senate. Thank you so much. And also here on the desk, we have Suzanne Perez, a longtime education reporter from the Wichita area and currently with KMUW, NPR, Kansas News Service, all of the above. Take your pick. And from Wichita TV 7, we have Lisa Edwards. Thank you all so much for being here. And Suzanne, I'm going to start with you because these are some of the issues that you've covered. They've had some screening devices that they've kind of used sporadically, especially at games and that sort of thing. But this is a pretty big change for the Wichita schools to even think about.
It is a huge change. They've been talking about, people have asked them for years and years, more than a decade, about metal detectors ever since, Columbine, really. How can we keep weapons and things out of schools? Their argument this whole time has been basically bottlenecks. It causes too many delays. If you have to have all these students, going through one entrance or just a few entrances, it's going to cause a lot of delays in getting to school and all that. Well, what they say now is that, the new technology is going to allow them to sort of move students through more quickly. So that's going to, speed things up that way, and that these particular devices can work without having to dump out backpacks and purses and all of that. So we're going to see how it works, but it is definitely huge news for the Wichita district and kind of telling of our times as well.
Very much so, Lisa.
I think that, me personally, that it's a good idea. I see the concept. I'm just not a fan because, a lot of the students feel I'm in prison, I'm in imprisonment. The same setup that we have in our school systems is what we have in our prison systems, the lunchrooms, the metal detectors and all of that stuff. Whereas I understand because there's a need. We need to figure out what to do with all of these, weapons that are coming through our schools. But at the same time, we don't want our children to feel like that they're being just shoved off into a system that they're being geared towards failure, if that makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense, and we hear it. It's sort of a delicate balance, I think, for school officials. I actually asked Terry Moses that, what about that sort of feeling of, that this is sort of institution? Her response was interesting. It was basically like, anytime you go to a concert now, anytime you go to a major athletic event, you're used to it. I went to a baseball game the other night, and there's, they searched me before I went in. You have to have clear backpacks. She thinks that because it's so much a, sort of routine for us now, or more routine, than it was 10 years ago, that people are going to be a little bit more, if not welcoming of it, at least a little more tolerant of it. But that whole concern is true. When you put up a metal detector anywhere, your thoughts go to, this must not be a safe place. So there's that balance there, I think.
Yeah, and Rick, I know that Wichita, not the only community dealing with this. They had a lockdown in McPherson just within the last week or so. And then the day that we're recording this episode, Hayesville actually had a bomb threat and they evacuated students there for a while. This is not just a Wichita issue.
That's correct. My Senate district comprises of 35 counties, 7 counties, 35 school districts, and it's not uncommon. It's just a matter of degree. The conversation I just heard from the other two conferees and participants is right on, but there is no choice, but we're going to have to harden these facilities. We're going to have to provide more security, and we're going to have screening. As unpalatable as it seems, it's hard to believe in these times that we're doing that, but that's the only way we can keep our kids safe and proceed on with education.
But is this an option that's available to all school districts? I mean, Wichita schools are talking $1.5 million. That's not a price tag that every district can afford.
You're exactly right. And it's going to have to be a budget item going forward. And the difficulty is some schools have, maybe let's just say, for example, two entrances. That's much easier to control than a school that has 10. And so the design of new schools are going to have to take that into account, and maybe in the long term, some architectural design work to limit the entrances and the exits. But yes, that's a huge budget item. Fully get it.
And Suzanne, that is definitely something we've seen a change in. I've worked in 2 different school districts. One of them, ironically enough, everybody complained about this. It was almost a brand new building when I started there, and yet it was set up in such a way where the office was in the middle of the building. There was no way to monitor even the main entrance, and most school districts now are routing kind of that entrance through the main office.
Right, and it is a logistical real problem for a lot of Wichita schools. You have buildings that are built in 1920. East High, for instance, has multiple entrances. Sort of filtering people to the right entrance, staffing those entrances too. I mean, it is a huge budgetary issue. One thing that the Wichita board has hinted at already is a possible bond issue. This is coming out of capital outlay. They're already sort of hinting that if you want safer schools, you're going to have to pay up for them.
Yeah. Well, the Wichita community also pulling together, trying to figure out the source of this increase in violence, from school fights to the weapons found. KAKE's John Hayes shows us why they believe it all begins long before kids head to school.
This group of Kansans gathered in Northeast Wichita Sunday to get to the bottom of this.
You are likely aware of a rash of incidents relating to unacceptable behavior in several of our high schools, including fights and incidents of students bringing a weapon to school.
When I got that phone call about, from Ms. Thompson talking about what's going on, I'm like, this is going on everywhere.
That phone call referencing a number of recent incidents across the Wichita Public School District in recent weeks. Thursday, a student caught with a gun at East High. Monday, a student brought one to West High School. And the next day, the same thing happened at Heights.
It only takes one, okay, to cause a catastrophe.
The school district says safety is its highest priority, and situations like these go too far.
Disruptive behavior that threatens the learning environment of our schools and causes fear or disruption will not be tolerated in our schools.
This group is hoping to address that behavior in 3 different ways: by listening to students.
They're coming with so much stuff that they could care less about math, because I just went through whatever I went through before I got off the bus.
Understanding what resources schools do have.
How many of our schools have mental health education or mental health assistance there?
And do not have, to help students thrive.
It is so traumatizing, the poverty, the lack of food, the lack of health, the lack of resources.
As well as improving community outreach in and out of the classroom.
They need to see somebody that cares.
But the community says it's going to take everyone in this room and then some to make those hopes a reality.
And a reminder, that meeting that he was talking about was last weekend. There were, you might probably notice some of the numbers changing. That's because more incidents happened after that meeting. And Lisa, you were at that meeting.
Yes.
From your perspective, what was the big takeaway from it?
You know, there was a big focus on what to do with the youth itself, like talking to them and not just talking. The one young lady brought up a really good point. When we talk and they want to come and share with us, we don't listen. We just jump to, I got the answer, let's solve it. And we don't always have the answers. And I was talking this over with everybody else at Wichita TV 7 station. I was like, you know, this is more of like a whole, well, I guess it's just, she summed it up. I mean, you know, we just don't listen, and we've got to learn how to just actually be there for the youth and understand what they're going through. The young youth actually spoke there, and they were like, look, we could come to you guys all we want to, but our families at home is like, you better not go out there. I grew up like that. Mm-hmm. I would get in trouble if I went to go talk to the counselor, a pastor, a teacher. They're like, why are you airing out our dirty laundry? So, you know, it's a matter of, these kids are crying out for help. It's a matter of how we're going to do that past the home. Especially when, you know, parents are kind of like, we want to keep everything kind of secret and everything like that. Yeah. And then that anger and frustration goes into the kids, and then they're ready to fight when they get off to the schools.
Yeah. Well, and there's also the transiency of the community in a lot of the Wichita schools. When I was teaching there, I would sometimes have students for a week or so, and then they would move, and so they would go to another high school for a while, and then several months later they would come back. It's hard to build that basic relationship with students and their families, which you really need to do in order to get them to feel comfortable coming to you.
I had worked at the USD 259 as a lunch lady, if you will, and the students that were at the schools would come to me. Yeah. And I'm like, I can't really legally give you advice, you know what I'm saying? But then on the personal side, as a God-fearing woman, I'm like, well, I'll pray with you. I'll share some inspirations with you. But even that was borderline, okay, you don't want to really do that. And I got called into the office. All right, you might want to stop that, you know? So it's just a matter of what we're allowed to do. Yeah.
Well, and it's also, as we kind of talked about, a reflection of what's going on in the community. And Rick, I'm going to come to you with this one. But the KBI, just as on the day that we're recording this episode, releasing its annual crime comparison. And if you look, 2020, 2021, quite a bit higher than 2019. Crime and violence much more prevalent in our society right now.
Yes, and I just read that. Thank you. I just read that article. You know, the violence fluctuates historically up and down. I think a lot of this school's problem is not only mental health. I served as chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee for 4 years and also the Juvenile Justice Reform Committee. And mental health is huge. By locking down the schools after COVID, I'm not going to debate whether that was right or wrong, but so many students fell further behind and they're frustrated. And we know that by the drop off in the number of students enrolled in the state of Kansas. And so we have a huge challenge ahead of us. As far as crime rate up or down, I don't know who can take credit or who can take blame. It always has fluctuated, but we are at a high peak compared to 15 years ago.
Yeah, most definitely. Suzanne?
It's a multifaceted problem for sure, but Rick is right. I mean, COVID had a huge impact not only on kids academically, but socially, and teachers are telling us this. You know, the Wichita Teachers Union, as part of its latest contract, made student behavior, a major priority. They're putting together a work group to just kind of get teachers and administrators and people together to just sort of talk this out, like, how do we handle this influx of behavior issues that we're seeing now?
And one solution that a lot of districts are coming up with is something called social emotional learning and diversity, equity, and inclusion. But those have become fighting words for some people, and that's behind the fight in one district, Derby. Let's go to Suzanne Perez from KMUW for a look at that issue.
A majority of board members in the Derby district south of Wichita say terms like equity and inclusion are political buzzwords. The board is considering new wording that calls for, quote, including everyone to unify our culture. Marilyn Shaw is a Black parent who says her children were harassed in Derby schools because of their race. She helped craft the plan that was rejected and says terminology shouldn't change the overall goal.
we're still going to get our point across that I want my kid to be able to sit in that classroom safely and receive the same educational experience as the kid sitting next to him.
Board members will meet in coming weeks to discuss parts of the plan focused on mental health and emotional well-being. For the Kansas News Service, I'm Suzanne Perez in Wichita.
And this was a follow-up, Suzanne, to a board meeting in which they turned down an earlier plan, including those terms.
Right. It was so interesting on a number of levels. A conservative majority took over the Derby board in January of this year and has made a lot of changes or proposed changes. The strategic plan, which is what this is all about, every district has a 5-year or 10-year long-term strategic plan. These are sort of overall beliefs, sort of belief statements, mission statements, usually pretty vague, usually not controversial at all. This time it was, and it was because of DEI. It was because of diversity, equity, inclusion, social emotional learning, mental health. Even some of the Derby board members are saying schools should not be in the business of mental health. Leave it to the medical professionals. So this has become a huge issue in Derby. They rejected, the majority, it was a 4-3 vote, they rejected that strategic plan that the community had voted on, and now they're trying to craft this compromise, which is real interesting to watch in action. It's semantics. It's using the word including instead of inclusion. It's very, it's kind of real nitpicky, but really the debate is, on these larger issues of should we be, talking about diversity and equity.
And I know I have gotten a lot of complaints from families and students with minority students in the district. It's not one that students seem to be real happy with if they are from minority communities.
When it comes to inclusion, it's not only minorities and stuff like that. You got an LGBTQ community. You've got the people that are in between their transgender, change. You've got different ethnicities and stuff like that.
Socioeconomics.
So, right,
yeah.
and different,
Right.
with money and stuff. So it's a matter of, I'm not mad at them. When it comes down to all that stuff, it's really tricky. And most people are just like, you know what? I'm gonna be hands off because everybody's offended by something these days. And in order to make that inclusion to be 100% where it needs to be, you have to include all of that. And nobody wants to take that time to sit around and just, okay, we gotta cater to them, we gotta cater to the Me Too's, we gotta cater to the men, we gotta cater to the blacks, you know what I'm saying? So, yeah, I'm interested in seeing what comes out of that as well.
Point of clarification, for me, minority includes all those groups. Otherwise, I would have said people of color.
Okay, well, see,
So terminology matters.
Yeah.
It does.
It does,
It really
and
does.
so does being clear what we mean when we use certain terms. And Rick, I'm going to come to you because I know that a lot of these terms are starting to get thrown around at the State House. We certainly heard a lot of them this last year.
Yes, thank you. And again, I listened to your guest, and that discussion is well heated. I do have faith in the process. These are elected officials, and I think in time allow this to develop out. Obviously, it blew up on them with a 5-4 vote. Not everybody's happy, but I do think they'll come to the table and work through this. We just have to be a little patient and go forward and see what the final product is. I do have faith in the system.
All right. Well, from elementary school to college, the national debate over things some conservatives call wokeism is seeping into the Kansas education system, as we saw during a recent confirmation hearing for 3 nominees to the Kansas Board of Regents. The Kansas Reflector reports Senate President Ty Masterson led the charge, quote, peppering the governor's 3 nominees to the Kansas Board of Regents with questions about the potential of faculty indoctrinating Kansas college students with woke ideology aimed at advancing politically or socially liberal ideas. We ought to keep the politics out of the university, the Reflector reports nominee John Dicus told Masterson. While Blake Benson didn't delve into woke political feuding, he told lawmakers a college education could provide the foundation of a well-rounded person. And he expects universities and colleges to challenge students in ways that enable them to grasp differences of opinion and belief. Diana Mendoza told lawmakers diversity isn't simply about where a student comes from. It's, quote, about the individual biography of the person. The Senate Confirmation Oversight Committee advanced all 3 to the full Senate for consideration, likely in January. So, Rick, I'm going to start with you on this one as a member of the Senate and of the Senate leadership. After this confirmation hearing, how likely do you think it is that these three nominees will end up on the Board of Regents?
Well, first of all, I'll answer your question directly. I think they're all three very good candidates coming from different parts of the society. And by the way, I happen to be on that confirmation committee, and I was there and asked questions myself. There were many other questions other than just wokeism. Mr. Dicus, of course, as chairman of Capitol Federal, comes with a strong business background, has been a great benefactor to the education system and his alma mater, KU. Blake Shelton is president of Pittsburgh Chamber of Commerce, brings another aspect to the table. Outstanding leader in his own right, strong supporter of Pittsburgh State. And then Ms. Mendoza, director of diversity at Dodge City School System. And let me tell you, she's done a marvelous job out there. Southwest Kansas is so diverse. Garden City school system has 40 different languages spoken. Dodge City has 27 different languages spoken, and her challenge is to bring those people to some sort of an educational opportunity to match their needs. And those three candidates, each one brought something to the table. Now, the questions they were asked as it relates to wokeism, that seems to be a concern by many, that we are seeing a liberalism in our universities. And at least the questions sent a signal that we have a concern. The questions that I raised was, since Mr. Dicus is very loyal to KU, would he be able to make an adverse decision about KU if it came up? And of course, I asked the same thing of Mr. Shelton as related to Pittsburgh State University. Would he be able to make a tough decision as related to Pittsburgh State? And did they see a conflict of interest? And of course, being professionals that they are, they recognize a conflict when they see it, and they would withdraw from the conversation and not to be involved in that thing. So I think, yes, they are three good quality candidates. They should be confirmed unless something should surface between now and the final vote.
Well, a good reminder that obviously the headline was not the only thing discussed in that hearing, but at the same time, we are hearing more and more concerns raised about this issue when it comes to the education sphere, Suzanne.
Right, and it just kind of makes me laugh anytime any politician says, let's keep politics out of XYZ. I mean, politics are everywhere. They're definitely in any kind of confirmation here, and that was interesting for me to hear Rick say that he's pretty positive about these candidates. It looks like they have a good shot, but let's not. We have to. It's worth noting that if these three nominees get onto the Board of Regents, the entire Board of Regents will have been appointed by Governor Laura Kelly. So that is, just sort of an interesting development. We still had some Brownback and maybe some Collier appointments that are dropping off. So if these three are approved, it's going to be a Kelly-nominated Board of Regents. But there are a lot of issues they need to be looking at.
Yeah.
I mean, at this point, I just am interested to see what's coming out of it. There's a lot of stuff shaking and moving from Topeka on down. And it's going to have a lot of effect all the way down to, like we were talking about earlier, the schools. And the shape of our nation is boiled down to what our youth are doing. They're just a spinning example of what's happening. So if she could get people in there that's actually going to do some good for Kansas, well, then more power to it. You know what I'm saying? Just as long as it's not a personal agenda, which we've seen a lot over the past year, with all of the people that are in government, All
right. Well, let's turn away from education now and take a look at the latest clash between Kansas lawmakers and the Department of Labor. The Kansas Reflector learned an investigation into unemployment fraud during the pandemic showed the state lost between $441 and $460 million. More than 90% of those dollars lost through claims filed online. State Representative Sean Tarwater said most of it was grade school type stuff that we should have been aware of in the first place, adding the claims could have been hacked by any fifth grader. He and other lawmakers clashed with the Secretary of Labor over keeping information related to the hacks private. The Kansas Reflector obtained a copy of the redacted report unavailable to the public and found all of the original text could still be read by simply copying and pasting it into a new document, despite being blacked out in the redacted document. That was a security risk in and of itself. So, Rick, I'm going to start with you again because this is most definitely a lawmaker issue. As we discuss these problems with the Department of Labor, I don't know about lawmakers, but in news media, especially where I work with the Special Projects Unit over at Cake News, we are constantly still getting phone calls from people who are having trouble with the department. They were flagged for fraud when they didn't commit fraud. They still haven't gotten paid for the lockdown, or any number of other issues, clawbacks that they don't think apply to them, and people are hurting.
Well, thank you, Pilar. And first of all, I want to correct the statement I made. I said Mr. Shelton. It's Blake Benson was the candidate for the Board of Regents, and I owe him an apology. I don't know what made me say Shelton. Back to the issue at hand. All of the things that you talked about, of course, have come to the forefront. We saw it bubbling up right after COVID and all the shutdowns and businesses and people out of work. And we had a number of things wrong. First of all, it's a 30-some-year-old legacy system. Secondly, the staff was just ill-prepared, ill-trained, and not ready to handle it. The governor was asked to slow the process down so we could get our hands around it, and she refused to take that move. A lot of this business as it relates to the post-audit and the independent auditing firm, I think fleshed out the fact that we were estimating $300 to $600 million fraud. They've narrowed it now down to the mid-400s. It's real, it's live, it's taxpayers' money. It even happened to me. I had a claim filed on my name, and you hardly can run across anybody that hasn't had or knows somebody that has had a false claim. In addition, the announcer there did mention that there are still people haven't got their money. That is true. However, the number has now dwindled much. I've had to ask my staff and other staff to help people get into access to get what was legitimately theirs. That's almost as big a sin as the ones that are fraudulent in the fact that people really did need help. But it was a disaster from the day one, and I think the audits are proving it.
And I think, Suzanne, from the media perspective, the news media perspective, the fact that the Department of Labor basically kind of went into fortress mode, would not talk to us, is part of the problem.
Yeah, this has been a thorn in Governor Kelly's side since day one. You know, this is the most competitive governor's race in the country now, we're hearing, and this is not good news for her if she doesn't get a handle on this.
All right. Well, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you all so much. Rick by Zoom and Lisa and Suzanne on set. We really appreciate you for joining us. I hope you've enjoyed our discussion. We'd also like to thank our news partners at the Wichita Eagle, Cake News, and KSN News for sharing their materials with us. We'd love to continue the conversation with you on social media. Just look for Pilar Pedraza TV or PBS Kansas on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. For now, stay safe and have a great week.